The NHS at 75, the Jingle and Mingle party re-investigated, and Prime Minister's questions at noon. This is Politics Live. Joining me today, Conservative peer and former Health Minister James Bethell, Labour peer Helena Kennedy, Spiked columnist Ella Whelan and Times columnist Melanie Phillips. On the programme.
This leaflet is coming through your letterbox.
The NHS is 75 today. Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer are at Westminster Abbey, not Prime Minister's questions.
We gather in thanksgiving for both the grace of God and the grace and glory that is the NHS.
Does the NHS need prayers or political intervention to survive?
That is, I think, the crowds are scattering down there.
Was the Israeli military operation in Jenin justified?
As long as we don't scream
Police relaunch an inquiry into the Jingle and Mingle party at Conservative headquarters during lockdown. And the former Shadow Chancellor takes aim at Keir Starmer.
I think what he's allowed to happen is a right-wing faction become drunk with power.
Let's start with the NHS. 75 years old, as we saw there in the headlines. Will it reach its 100th birthday, James Bethell?
Yes, it will. I mean, we are very proud of it. It's doing a very good job for the people it serves. The problem is it doesn't have enough resources to serve everyone as well as it could do. And I think we need to do, as a government and as a society, more to protect the NHS by trying to create a healthier Britain and to prevent people from being so sick. And
we'll talk about that later on in the programme. Melanie, as I said, it's 75 years old today. Do you think it'll make its 100th birthday?
I think the entire political class remains in a state of deep denial about the NHS. The NHS is staffed by wonderful people, but it is not fit for purpose anymore. It is incapable of delivering what it purports to deliver. More and more money has been poured into it, so much money that it's now distorting the entire economy. Britain is in danger of becoming basically a health system with a nation attached to it. My own view, and it's changed over the years, I used to be a passionate supporter of the NHS. My view was changed by the way it treated members of my own family. I believe, personally, that the discussion, which is always NHS or private health insurance, is wrong. The neglect of the issue means that more and more people are taking private health insurance. We're getting a two-tier system by default. My own view is that a much better system is a European-style social health insurance system which covers everybody, produces social solidarity and raises standards.
All right, changing the funding formula. Will it reach its 100th birthday, Helena?
It will, and I hope that when a Labour government returns that it makes it a priority to properly fund it. Let's be very clear. We have seen over the last of this period of Conservative government, not a default position, Melanie, a deliberate intent on taking the National Health Service down to a position where more and more people working in it have to find ways of supplementing their income because we have underfunded it, because we have people doing the jobs of two people at a time. So, of course, people like Melanie's family aren't getting the treatment that they might want. That's been deliberate. And it has been the business of resourcing has been a deliberate intent to turn it into something in which profit can be made for certain sections of our community, the ones who are making a lot of money out of a lot of stuff. Private equity is looking at the National Health Service with a beady eye, wanting to profit from it.
Just before I come to you, Ella, just answer that point. A deliberate policy, deliberate intent to bring the NHS down to the level it is today.
I think Melanie and Helena are both right in a way. Melanie's right that we're spending a huge amount on health, more than we've ever done. There are more nurses, more doctors than there have ever been, and the projections are going up and up. But the idea that there's some kind of conspiracy to privatise the NHS is completely for the birds. There's no evidence of that, and that is not where the politics of the situation.
I'll come back to you because we're going to discuss this further. But just as a sort of opening thought, is it going to make its 100th birthday?
I'm not so sure, because I think if we continue to treat it like a religious institution that gets prayers and blessings and good wishes, rather than what it originally was and should remain to be, which is a political project, one which I believe in, that you provide a social service on the basis of health for people, free at the point of access, and for all of any kind of ill that people get, and that covers everything from dentistry, being short-sighted, to cancer treatment, all the rest of it. And I think we've forgotten that political projects need political will, and it is remarkable if you think about it. It is a bit like, I don't know, one of these statues we've got a lot of in Ireland of Mother Mary, where people just throw money at the NHS and hope for the best and sort of cross their fingers. And in actual fact, we have to have a serious conversation about how it runs, what the system is, which, to be fair, all politicians say they want to have, and there's a lot of noise around that, but there's never any substance.
Well, you brought up this issue about what politicians say and what they perhaps really think. That was something that the former Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, talked about in an article and interviews that he has done, that they say one thing, politicians privately, that it's not sustainable, the NHS in its current form, but they say publicly something quite different. In response to that, we have the current Health Secretary in the Times, Steve Barclay, calling for evolution, not revolution, which is what Sajid Javid was talking about, fundamental reform, as the NHS turns 75. On the other hand, we had another intervention from the former Labour Prime Minister, Tony Blair, saying let NHS patients pay to skip the queue. He said they should be allowed to pay to be treated more quickly and use health service cash to pay for private treatment, not normally funded by the taxpayer. Who's right, James?
Well, I don't think that the idea that anyone paying to skip the queue is going to change the problems that we face in terms of having to ration scarce resources to a very few number of people. The biggest problem we have is that the country on the whole is very unwell. It's the 6 million people with diabetes, it's the obesity, it's the dirty air, mouldy homes and junk food. Those are the environmental problems that are driving the NHS.
Right, and if those are such fundamental problems, who is right in terms of offering some sort of diagnosis? Is it Tony Blair and Sajid Javid, fundamental reform, not tinkering around the edges, fundamental reform, or is Steve Barclay right, evolution?
No, Steve is not correct in this. Evolution will not solve the problem. Ella is correct that this is at heart a political problem. We need to have a new type of social contract around the NHS. Free at the point of delivery is the correct mandate, but we can't only have that. We have to have a country that supports healthy living. And at the moment, we're just chucking too many sick people at the NHS. There just aren't enough resources to look after all of that. And instead of scapegoating the NHS, if we want it to last, we need to protect it from this tsunami of illness.
James is right. James is right. You see, part of the project of the Conservatives in the 21st century has been neoliberal economics, where you shrink the state to nothing, people have to do lower taxation, and as a result, you shrink all the things that James has been talking about, which lead to ill health, which lead to more problems and mental health problems because of the way in which people are working, because of what we've done to the whole contract around working. And so people are more ill, and the demands on the National Health Service become greater. So you have to have a real rethink. But it has to be about saying we have to be putting more money, that I believe that there should be higher taxation, particularly from the better off.
Right.
And I actually do think...
The Labour Party, of course, is not proposing to do that. And the tax burden is very high, the highest it's been for 70 years.
I'm talking about taxing those at the high end. Look at all those people who are not paying tax at all because they're using out-of-country tax havens in order to avoid taxation. Look at the fact that people on their dividends for these water companies, the dividends are taxed at less than we pay as income tax.
So you would like to see higher taxes to pay for...
Tax of some of these big corporations that are getting away with not paying tax, and the water companies and the banks that are actually profiteering out of the public.
Melanie, I'll come to you, Ella.
I don't think the issue is more money, however one politically wants to raise that money. The NHS is a top-down institution with an enormous bureaucracy. that is sucking an enormous amount, not only of money from the frontline services which need it, but it's distorted the entire priorities of the health service, which is why I think that the actual structural that the health service suffers from an actual structural problem, which is why I want to see a completely different system. Certainly, free at the point of use, absolutely. Certainly, to cover the most poor in society, equally, certainly. These are the principles of social solidarity which underpin the NHS. It's the wrong model. European-style social insurance.
But that means people paying into a scheme
everybody
to provide their health care.
Everybody pays into a scheme. I think the most indigent don't pay, but are carried by everybody else.
If you look at the statistics, we're right down at the bottom of that list in terms of how much of our GDP we actually spend on health. And so you'll find that the United States actually, for all its, I mean, it's a terrible system. Europe, you go all the way down at Germany and all of those actually spend much more money than we do on health.
Arguably, we actually pay quite a big proportion, not as much as some countries, but comparable developed countries, but per capita on health, we spend a lot less than, for example, Germany.
Else, Jo. We've been deprofessionalising the professions in this country, and that's what the government has done in relation to doctors not being paid properly for 16 years, even consultants, so they end up going more into the private sector. You've got young doctors leaving. One of my own daughters is a doctor, and she's seeing her colleagues going to New Zealand and to Australia. This is a serious crisis, but we've been deprofessionalising the professions. It's happened to lawyers who work in the legal aid area. Yes, we have been professionalising the profession.
The funding question to me seems relatively... I don't know about how you raise it, and then we can have a row about taxes, but I can imagine people at home really don't want to watch another row about taxes. But they're, you know, answering the issue of the strikes, it seems to me a no-brainer that you pay people who are providing the service what they deserve. And actually what a lot of the striking nurses or doctors are asking for is not heaven and earth. It's relatively reasonable, it seems to me. But that isn't... I think the most important thing that nobody's picked up on, and I'm going to take the bait, is James's point about, you know, this insinuation, I think, that a lot of politicians are in favour of at the moment, that the NHS should only provide services for virtuous people. So if you are a smoker, maybe you don't deserve treatment for lung cancer as much as somebody who didn't smoke. Maybe if you indulged in Mars bars and got a bit heavy around the waist, maybe it's your own fault that you then come up with health problems in the same. That's, to me, an incredibly dystopian way of approaching a national health service. But more fundamentally, you know, you're wrong. Mouldy homes and air pollution and diabetes and stuff like that is not the answer to all of the issues we have with the NHS. Take, for example, the maternity scandal that has been, you know, everybody's forgotten about it now. Sadly, having just had a baby, I can't forget it that quickly. Where women and babies are dying because of a lack of proper NHS care, which has nothing to do with the fact that someone might be a bit overweight or all the rest of it. It's because the priorities and how maternity care is organised is all over the shop.
All right, well, let James answer, because you disagree fundamentally. I mean, the maternity question is just slightly separate, but I take your point. I mean, this headline, Rishi Sunak will fail on NHS unless he ditches nanny state fears. You're urging preventative anti-obesity schemes such as ban on junk food ads, the sort of thing that Ella says is not the issue.
Yes, I mean, it's heartbreaking, but we do know how to run a really healthy country and to have great results. It's called Buckinghamshire. And in a prosperous part of Britain, we do very well in terms of our health outcomes. But in other areas like Blackpool or Rotherham or coastal towns, we really struggle. And I agree with Ella. There's no question of us leaving behind people who are dealing with deprivation, with difficult environments, with toxic workplaces. Those are the people who consume and need the most amount of healthcare. And we need to improve the environments in which those people live. Otherwise, we will literally drown, as Melanie rightly pointed out, under the weight of healthcare. Our productivity of our workforce will continue to sink. We will no longer be a destination for foreign investment. And the benefits bill, which is really where the biggest costs are seen, will continue to rise as people have to leave jobs in order to support loved ones who are poorly. If you don't get the environment right, there's no way the NHS can survive.
You're missing the point, which is that I'm not talking about raising people's living standards, of which I would be very pleased for any government to do, to raise people's living standards.
Living standards is part of it.
But I read an article in the Times, James, where you were quoted talking about the fact that the government had missed the heaven-sent opportunity of the pandemic. To introduce public health measures, you know, I don't know, what are you talking about, sort of banning junk food ads and that kind of thing?
Well, let James say what they are, these specific measures.
But just hang on a minute. A heaven-sent opportunity, the pandemic. to introduce the kind of measures that would penalise working class people and control how they spend their own money and what they have access to. I mean, have you lost all touch with reality, or do you really think this is what people...
That's not what I said.
Well, let me respond and let me bring the others
What the
in.
pandemic offered us was an opportunity to have a think about how we have our relationship with the NHS. At the moment, it is a one-way contract that the NHS will be there for you when you are sick, which we should never change.
And we had to sacrifice ourselves for it.
Hang on, Ella.
Contract, which involves the whole of government, so that people who are responsible for homes, for the air, for the food, participate in trying to make a healthy country, and that people themselves have some agency, and we are supporting them to take more responsibility for their own health. That is how other health systems work. We are unusual in Britain for having a one-way system where we tell people that we will pick you up and put you back on your feet when you're ill, whereas in fact, if you do have a heart attack, or if you do become obese, or if you do become ill, it is very difficult to get you back to good shape in the end.
But what is it you're asking people to do? Yeah. I mean, are you asking people then to say, I've got to get my diet sorted, and I've got to get this sorted, or I won't get health care?
I'm asking government to step up to the responsibility of looking at the whole health of the nation, not of scapegoating the NHS to simply look after the
funding
sick.
Public health
and to show some leadership. And secondly, for there to be a conversation about how people can be best supported to lead healthier lives.
The project, the political project, was such a wonderful thing. I mean, I can tell you that my mother's little brother, she would always tell that story before the National Health Service came in, ended up, they didn't have the money to go to a doctor because he was ill and should have been seen by somebody earlier on. And so those stories live on in the memories of too many people who are now dying or dead. But they should live on in people's memories that when we had a system that really did differentiate between people, it was terrible. And so we've got to remember that this was a great project of the country coming together and saying we're going to care for each other. And that's what social security is about. That's what a welfare state is about. And it's a good thing, and we should believe in it. But this government has been really shrinking it in a way that has had huge damaging effects across the piece. And I'm telling you, young doctors now are doing the work of 2 doctors, and that ends up leading to catastrophes within the health service.
Well, and perhaps choices. You talked about rationing. You said it in an interview on the BBC on Sunday too. Obviously, then people making decisions not for clinical reasons, but because of waiting lists. Well, that certainly was the implication. But if somebody is obese and they go for an operation, is it right that they should be asked to lose weight first before they have that operation in order to improve their health outcome, if that's the thinking behind it?
No, that's not how we run our health service, and that's not how I suggest we should. But everyone...
You haven't been in a doctor's surgery recently. They lecture you about absolutely everything.
Yes, a lecturer is quite right. And they should lecture you about giving up smoking, and they should lecture you about trying to lead your life more healthily. That is in your own interests, because we all have to look after ourselves. The doctors can't mend us for everything, and it's in the interests of the country.
This is what I mean about doctors acting like priests,
all right,
the NHS acting like a religious institution.
Well, let me get Melanie in. Where are you on this in terms of health interventions, the government advocating that there should be this sort of intervention in the health service in a preventative manner?
Well, I'm absolutely in favour of preventative measures. I'm in favour of the government giving a lead. I'm in favour of the government giving advice and education about nutrition and obesity and blah, blah. There's a debate about how far they go, but nevertheless, in principle, for sure. But for goodness sake, I have been hearing this for the 3 or 4 decades I've been writing about the health service. I've heard it all before. It is irrelevant. We need healthier people. We need healthier lifestyles, sure. We need a higher standard of living. We need to address inequalities, for sure. It's not the point. If we do all that, we still have a system which is fundamentally dysfunctional because it is top-down, it is not responsive to patients, it's not geared around patients. I mean, just talk about my own personal experience, it's nothing to do with the wicked Conservative government. I'm talking about an experience that goes back into Labour administrations.
Labour poured money into and it talked to doctors, and it was a different world.
What I saw was nothing to do with money. It was to do with attitudes. It was an attitude which said, we are doing you a favour, you the patient.
Of course, Melanie, just to be clear, they did increase taxation under Gordon Brown and Tony Blair. Satisfaction rates were high in the NHS, admittedly, actually, by the time Cameron came in.
Waiting lists were diminished hugely.
I think where Melanie's definitely got a point. If we're going to embrace new technologies, if we're going to embrace a different way of putting prevention at the heart of our health system, we have to take medicine much closer to people in the communities that they live in.
Well, can I give... let me give you this example then, James, because it's about the ultra-low emission zone, tackling air quality, another issue for the NHS when it comes to asthma and any respiratory-related illnesses. Bloomberg, London's ULEZ, which is what that stands for, expansion, hits potential roadblock from High Court challenge. A group of Tory-led London councils argue that the expansion would hurt them economically. This is the expansion being proposed by Sadiq Khan, Labour's mayor in London. Who's right here? He says he's tackling air quality issues for the health of Londoners. Tory-led councils are saying no.
I'm a convert on this one. I live underneath the M40, and my life, personally, and that of my family, has improved tremendously because of cleaner air. Now, when I go to places like Rome, I went to Manchester the other day, you really, really notice the difference.
So they're wrong, aren't they?
I think the Conservative councils here, well, some of them are on the periphery of London, so they do have slightly different issues to mine in the central London. But yes, I think that clean air has become one of the front lines of the political battle over health, and it epitomises my point that we should be leaning into these.
And isn't that important, Ella?
Of course, clean air is important, but this is a perfect example of where this kind of action goes wrong. I don't know if you've ever tried to get a big weekly shop home in Bexley. It will take you all day unless you have a car. Probably it'll take you 2 days because you probably have to walk it. These kind of the boroughs that are now having bans on cars, particularly cars that are owned by poorer members of society who can't afford either a new one that's ULEZ compliant or an electric car, are literally being put under house arrest by these kind of measures and having all access to transport stripped from them. It is the ULEZ and low traffic neighbourhoods our networks are a poor tax. They are an infringement on people's ability to get around, and they hit, guess what, care workers who rely on cars, disabled people who rely on cars, the people who deliver shopping, the people who deliver the post, all the rest of it. I have never seen such a clear case of class prejudice as people who cheerlead the ULEZ.
All right, Helena, is that class prejudice by Sadiq Khan?
No, you only have to listen to the mother of who's at the front of this campaign, Rosamond, whose little girl died of the most terrible, tragic death because of her asthma, and it was very clear. And she campaigns passionately about this, and she gets a hell of a lot of abuse, I'm sure, from people who read Spike.
We've had her on the programme.
But all I can tell you is that she is leading a campaign with the mayor, and on something that is vitally important. And it's vitally important. Clean air is as part and parcel of how we live healthy lives. And once you start interfering with people's lungs, it leads to so many diseases and so much cost. And if you care about any of that, then people have to think of other ways.
Hang on, just one, because James, you said you don't agree with the Tory-led councils broadly in terms of trying to challenge the expansion of ULEZ. Actually, the Labour's candidate in Uxbridge and South Ruislip, with Boris Johnson's former seat, is also challenging it against it. Probably for some of the reasons that Ella has put. Is he wrong too?
Well, I mean, I just think that sometimes you have to take a leap and do something that is radical, and this is radical.
And undemocratic.
No. We'll talk about democracy in a minute, because I'm not sure that you and I agree with what democracy means. But the real thing here is we're talking about climate change, we're talking about clean air, we're talking about the things that we have to do which affect all of us, and we have to involve all of us in inconvenience. And let me tell you, it's the well-off mainly who've got the cars that suck up tons of this of gas and then put it into the air. I don't agree with Ella at all.
I think Ella's got good points on transition arrangements. Those people who do have to change their cars should be supported, and if that comes as a hard cost and it's hitting their budgets, then yes, transition costs are important. But listen, the benefits in terms of productivity, the health of the nation are going to be enormous. And these are exactly the kinds of measures that we need to be doing to improve the health.
Do we understand how a city works? Do we want to treat cities as if they are little villages in the Shire? I mean, it's obvious that a city needs to have cars circulating and vehicles in order to make it function, not just to get the people that make a city function around, but also to transport the goods, to do the things that, you know, for example, my father was a builder for many, many years, had to retire early against his will because his vehicle didn't meet the ULEZ thing, couldn't afford to buy a new one. That is a direct loss of income for my father and for lots of working class men like him. them. My husband is a tree surgeon who goes into neighbourhoods, particularly in Hackney, and everyone's got these LTN and ULEZ Pro posters in their windows, and I don't know, they expect him to take the tree on his back away with him down the road without a vehicle. There is just, you know, of course, let's have a conversation about, I would love it if there was an announcement tomorrow that tripled bus and train services and cut them half in price. Who wouldn't love that? I would love to go to work and be able to read a book on the bus. I'm sure most people would do that. But you are misunderstanding why people drive cars. It's both for necessity and also for enjoyment. The history of the automobile is about freedom and being able to hit the open road, and we're turning into sort of a kind of myopic approach to this.
I'm sure we'll return to this issue time and again. Let's talk about something different, because the Home Office announced last month that on-site drug testing at festivals, music festivals, can no longer go ahead without a licence. We covered the story at the time. The organiser of Park Life Festival, Sacha Lord, called Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, a dangerous person for backing the U-turn and argued that it saves lives. Sacha Lord, who is also the nighttime economy advisor for Greater Manchester, has written to her along with 31 MPs. Lord Bethell, James Bethell, has tweeted this: on drug testing at clubs, festivals and raves, I've changed my mind. And now I agree with Fatboy Slim and Caroline Dinage on this one. Pragmatism over ideology makes better public health outcomes. A continuum here of what you've been saying.
So I used to run the Ministry of Sound for 10 years, one of the senior managers there. And I have to say that if someone had come to me and said, we want to set up a laboratory in your foyer so that we can test drugs, I would have been horrified and I'd have sent them on their way. It would have been a total pain in the neck. Things have changed since then in quite a big way. They're cutting drugs with synthetic opioids, with skunk and with all sorts of nasty drugs that are making the dangers of taking a drug that you don't know is in there much worse than the dangers of taking a drug that you think you know about. Right. And that is a very good reason why I now support the loop and this kind of approach.
We've just been showing some pictures to our viewers of drug testing being carried out at festivals for the safety of young people. Do you support the idea of drug testing at festivals, Melanie?
Well, I have to say I haven't given this a great deal of thought until about 5 seconds ago, but it seems to me there is a sort of fundamental issue here, which is those who say we have to accept that drugs are taken at these places and we must therefore make them safer, and those who say that actually it's wrong for drugs to be used at these places at all and there should be a law enforcement approach. Now, I'm in favour of the latter. I am very troubled by the trend over the years in Britain to move away from the law enforcement model against prohibited drugs towards an idea of harm reduction. Harm reduction suggests that we accept that there is harm and we simply take, as Lord Bethell has said, a pragmatic approach. I don't think there's anything ideological, however, about wanting to uphold the law. The law is there because these drugs are fundamentally, innately and intrinsically dangerous. And that should be the approach. Zero tolerance for drugs.
James, can you convince Melanie?
Well, I think if you're running a festival or a club, I'm afraid it's not your responsibility to run the law and order programme of the nation. You are administering your venue and your location, and the safety of the people inside your business is of paramount importance. And I think...
Gosh, you mean you turn a blind eye? You should turn a blind eye to major law-breaking in your...
I have to break it to you that there are drugs in every pub, club and schoolyard.
And they should be ignored,
Britain.
therefore.
And therefore, the people who run those institutions, it's just not their public responsibility to take account for every action of the people in their venue. It just isn't. But the health and safety of those people is. And therefore, actions that protect the safety and health of the people on your venue are more important than almost anything else.
But this is doublespeak. Their health and safety is compromised by taking these drugs. And you, not you personally, are conniving at law-breaking.
That's not the view of the people who are taking the drugs, and it's not the...
I'm sure it's not.
Pragmatically, the evidence before our eyes. There are millions of people taking drugs this weekend. and not all of them are going to be in.
Where are you on this, Helena?
Oh, I'm with the pragmatists because, I mean, I've seen all of this going through the courts, and I've seen when governments have been, you know, clamping down on everything, and I've seen them. I've seen it develop into a much more pragmatic thing, which is of not arresting people when they've got a small amount of personal use cannabis, or whether they've got some upper that they use for dancing or whatever. I really think that I think it's right that there should be testing, and I don't think you need to be licensing them. There are charities and there are outfits like Loop that do this at festivals, and people want to know what they're taking. I mean, people are not daft. They do. Lots of the young will go and have something tested to make sure that they're not taking something that has been interfered with, where it has been cut with something that is going to actually be very damaging. I mean, and I've seen, you know, the horror of all of this through the courts, and I actually do think that the Home Office is making a mistake on this, of thinking that the only way to do it is by licensing.
Ella?
Well, I think the Loop does a great job, and I'm a big supporter of them. But I think Melanie has a point that I disagree with. I disagree with the idea that drugs are innately dangerous. I mean, I'm not going to out myself on anything, but I think that, you know, there are lots of people who can anecdotally say that they are not innately dangerous.
No, but what do you agree with Melanie on?
I agree with her that if it is the case that you shouldn't really have a halfway house on this. I'm all in favour of completely legalising drugs, because we either say this is something that society thinks it's okay for people to take, that you have agency. I would argue that a different approach to drugs would mean that people had a personal different approach to them. You know, you can kill yourself with drink, that's legal. You can also kill yourself with ecstasy. But we have, you know, if you make it a sort of emphasis on personal responsibility, that can change. But you do find yourself in a bit of a difficult place as a government if you're saying, essentially, as much as I support the Loop, well, we just will pretend we're not really that anti-drugs in this situation.
All right, we're going to talk about Israel because the government has said that it's ended its operation in the Jenin refugee camp. It's in the city of Jenin in the northern part of the occupied West Bank after 2 days of clashes. Israel, the Israeli military, say they are targeting terrorists. The Palestinian Authority, who are in charge administratively of the area, have accused the Israeli government of a war crime. Our correspondent, Yolande Nell, the BBC Middle East correspondent, is in Jerusalem. Yolande, can you bring us up to date exactly with what's happening?
So the Israeli military says that it has withdrawn all of its forces from Jenin after this very intense 2-day major military operation, the biggest of its kind in the West Bank, really for many years. And it involved airstrikes as well as Israeli armoured bulldozers and hundreds of soldiers going in there on the ground. Now, this morning we've seen in Jenin refugee camp residents returning just because some of them had fled, others coming out from inside their homes where they had been really holed up through this whole operation. And they've been checking, of course, the wide-scale destruction that there is. We've got roads that have been ripped up. That has caused significant damage to the electricity and to the water networks there. There has been fires burning, smouldering still. Many of the shops at the entrance of the camp have been destroyed, people's livelihoods along with those. Some people have been returning to their homes and finding that they have now been made uninhabitable by all of this violence that has gone on. There have been expressions of real anger about what's happened. Also, some people expressing victory that this is over. They see the Palestinian gunmen, there are a couple of hundred of them at least, that operate inside this camp, that they have given resistance to the Israeli forces. Funerals have been taking place for 12 Palestinians, some of those who were killed in the camp. Now, we know that from the Israeli military, they've been saying all of those killed were militants. Certainly the BBC has been able to ascertain that 8 of those young men and teenage boys were affiliated with different Palestinian militant groups. But a doctor told me just yesterday, a Palestinian doctor, that he had definitely treated civilians among the some 120 people who were injured.
Yolande, take us through the attack in Tel Aviv on pedestrians walking the streets there.
So this is what happened a day ago. 6 people were injured in a car ramming and stabbing attack in Tel Aviv. And that was carried out, it seems, by a Palestinian man who's believed to have come from the West Bank, that he may have been associated, an activist with the Palestinian militant group Hamas and the other big militant group, Islamic Jihad, basically praised this attack, said it was a natural response to what was happening in Jenin without claiming responsibility. Now, on top of that, we did see 5 rockets that were fired from the Gaza Strip into Israel overnight. They were all intercepted by Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system, but it really showed the danger of an escalation in violence here the longer this operation went on in Jenin.
Yolande Nell, there in Jerusalem, thank you very much. Was the military operation by the Israelis justified in Jenin, Helena?
Well, I mean, the problem is that, you know, the Israeli government just now, which is, I have to say, an extreme right-wing government. It's a terrible government. And Netanyahu is looking for all kinds of distractions from his own problems. And they're attacking the rule of law. So let's be very clear that this is moving towards, you know, a quasi-fascism. But let's just talk about this thing. It's not separate, because I think there is a sort of level in which it's quite a useful distraction to go after the people who are the Palestinians, who are undoubtedly waging a war against the Israeli government, because there are bombs being put off. And of course, governments are entitled to take steps to deal with that kind of thing. But let me just say this to you. You don't go into places where huge numbers of civilians are going to be put at risk. That can't be an acceptable thing to do. And the other thing is, it breaks my heart watching this, because I believe that the Palestinians and the Israelis could have 2 states side by side, but that has slowly but surely been destroyed by the settlements that have been created in the very area in which the Palestinians wanted to create. If you crush people's aspirations, people will rise up and, unfortunately, take the law into their hands.
Melanie.
This is not a war by Palestinians against the Israeli government. This is a situation in which Jenin and other places in the disputed territories have become a centre for a sophisticated infrastructure of terror, which seeks to murder Israeli civilians. So far this year, I think 24 Israeli civilians have been murdered as a result of people from these territories, 31 last year. The Israelis have gone in with great reluctance because, as we know, this is a tremendously densely populated area. Very, very difficult to avoid civilian casualties.
Some families were evacuated.
When this started, I heard somebody on the BBC Today programme say it is impossible to do this without civilian casualties. The Israelis say they have killed 11 or 12 Palestinian terrorists. They say that not one civilian has been killed.
We've heard that's been slightly disputed.
Astonishing situation. What is so extraordinary about the BBC's coverage of this and the media in general is that nobody has said the most important thing about why the Israelis have gone in.
You're saying it.
Because the Palestinian gunmen, the terror groups, are being funded, backed and trained by Iran. This is a war by Iran against Israel. The Palestinians themselves say this. Something like, according to the United States, $100 million was poured into these groups last year. The supreme leader in Iran has decided, and this is well known and it has been talked about by Palestinians and Iranians, they've decided to export the war from Gaza into the disputed territories. As a result, there have been rockets launched from the disputed territories. These territories have the capacity of hitting planes leaving or arriving in Ben Gurion Airport and much of central Israel.
All right. Helena, do you want to answer some of those points that justify in Melanie's mind?
I am all too aware of the mendacious nature of Iran and have been very outspoken in relation to the atrocities that Iran is prepared to do. But I want to go back to Melanie just to say to her, the history of this is that and you would have been part of this, believing that there could be a two-state solution here. And if you crush people's aspirations to have their own nation, then inevitably this is going to continue forever, and people will reach out to Iran for support and help and money. If you don't let people have aspirations to have their own nation, that's what the Palestinians wanted.
For sure.
And you know that all those settlements have made that impossible.
No, that is not true. The Palestinians or the Arabs have been offered a two-state solution since the 1930s on several occasions. On each occasion, the Israelis, and before them the Jews of Mandate Palestine, said, we don't like this, but we will accept it. On every occasion, the Arabs / Palestinians said, no, we don't accept it, and they then redoubled their war of mass murder against Israelis. They want to exterminate completely the Jewish state. They say so, and
the Palestinian Authority doesn't say that.
Melanie,
Hamas has in time, but that is not the case, Melanie. In terms of certainly what they say publicly, the Palestinian Authority doesn't say that.
You can look at it online. They teach their children to murder Jews.
Let's not get into what is, to some extent, propaganda on both sides. I'm sure sincerely held and sincerely believed. But in terms of this particular operation, it's very clear where you both stand. You don't think it's justified, and you clearly think it does.
It's against international law.
Well, I mean, there are lots of things that are stated against international...
Against international law is the deliberate targeting of Israeli civilians. Why don't you talk about that, Helena?
We're going to take a little breather and just go into the House of Commons, because we have Prime Minister's questions coming up in 5 minutes' time. But it's not, of course, with the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition, because they're at Westminster Abbey. It will be with the deputies, Oliver Dowden for the government, and the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, Angela Rayner. Just continuing on this theme of foreign policy, because the government, Rishi Sunak, when it came to this military operation by the Israelis, urged restraint. And the government is also keen to underline the fact that foreign policy is something that is reserved to the UK national government, because there is a bill going through Parliament at the moment aimed at restricting other public institutions, including local authorities and councils, from boycotting particular countries when it comes to their investments. Now, it's been widely presumed to be a response to councils deciding, some of them, to boycott or sanction Israel when it comes to those investments. Here is the headline in BBC News: backlash over bill banning boycotts, not that easy to say, of Israel goods from public bodies. Do you support the bill, Melanie?
Yes, I do, for the reasons that Michael Gove set out. Because the boycott, divestment and sanctions movement has at its fundamental aim, according to its founder, the annihilation of Israel. And I believe that is simply wrong. It's wrong for, I think, for councils and other public bodies to be involved in foreign policy decisions anyway, but certainly to back this. And the arguments made against this bill, many of them are completely specious.
Right. Well, on that, do you support the bill, or should councils be allowed to take decisions? The government says foreign policy, but should they be allowed to boycott?
Absolutely, and universities should, and so on. And the reason why is because, as a young woman, I was very actively involved in the anti-apartheid movement, and there was no doubt that boycotts were one of the things that brought that horrible regime to its knees and ended it. And I'm involved just now in the whole business with China. I've been sanctioned by the Chinese, and we know that in the Xinjiang province that there are concentration camps there that are being used for the production of goods that are being sold into our country. I want those goods to be boycotted. And so I want local authorities to say we're not going to buy things from certain places. And it's not, I mean, you know, I know that Melanie's focus is Israel, but there are lots of countries around the world which need to be boycotted.
Well, on that, responding to what Helena is saying about China and the Uyghurs, there are some Tory MPs who are unhappy with this because they agree with Helena.
I agree with Helena 100%. The NHS, for instance, as an organisation, has a massive procurement footprint, huge acquisition strategy, and it has categorically pushed against purchasing any materials that might be produced by modern slavery. That is a progressive move. But I can tell you, trying to run things in this country is quite difficult and complicated enough. If you have a tapestry of boycotts in different local authorities, it could bring the functioning
I will
of
get
modern
to you,
government
and I'm
to a
just going to
halt.
let Melanie respond, and then I'll come to you. Yes.
The bill does specifically allow for exemptions.
It does, but it doesn't
and
include...
the government says that these will include China and Russia.
I thought it was Belarus and Russia. I'm not sure it includes... Well, OK, but I don't think it doesn't...
Wouldn't you want to boycott Iran? You're telling us about the full horrors. I mean, I think Iran is committing atrocity crimes in relation, particularly in relation to women. I would boycott Iran on many things, and I want local authorities to be able to do it. It's democracy,
and they could do it under this bill.
No.
I don't agree with this bill. I think that you do not meet censorship with more censorship, and it's but I think that we should take Melanie's point seriously, which is that the issue of BDS policies, a huge amount of them are, if you look at particularly in relation to the conversation on university campuses, are rooted in some very serious anti-Semitic narratives, particularly, and it is remarkable that we've had a sort of broad discussion about several countries, but when it comes to boycotting and divestment and all that rest of it, Israel is always the primary focus. Israel is always the priority. And you have to ask the question of why that is, what the history of anti-Semitism plays in it. But just to come back to the original conversation, which is that if we want, there is this sort of Western arrogance, which particularly among young people as it happens, that, not buying something from a particular country is going to have an effect. And that massively underestimates and misunderstands what's happening in Israel and Palestine. And don't take it from me, take it from Jeremy Bowen, who's been incredibly good, I think, across Radio 4 and other channels in the last few days, saying that the two-state solution is gone and that we should just stop talking about it. It's a tragedy that it's gone.
It's been destroyed. It's been destroyed, and we know why it's been destroyed, by the settlements encroaching into the very land in which the Palestinians could make a nation.
I know we want to go back to the Israeli-Palestinian issue, but just briefly before we go into the chamber, Helena, why did Labour abstain on this?
They're not going to abstain when it comes to the actual bill. At the moment, they're trying to put together a thing which is in relation to the issue that Melanie is raising, to make sure that that no anti-Semitism is involved in any of this. But you see,
is that because the Labour Party is sensitive about this issue, following on from Jeremy Corbyn?
And so they should be. But the thing about it is that you've got to be able to criticise Israel as a government. I criticise this government. You've got to be able to criticise a government without it meaning that you're an anti-Semite. And that is really important, and we have to make sure that people understand that. There are lots of things about what the Israeli government's doing just now in relation to the rule of law, which is deserving of criticism, and every Saturday night, huge numbers of Israelis are on the streets.
Which they are, but they are, just to get your...
No one's stopping you saying that.
What, criticising the Israeli government?
Let's be very clear.
Do you think this bill is actually ill-advised?
I'm against the boycotts that are being suggested, but I do think this question of procurement is going to be centre stage for some time to come. The way in which governments defend the country and its resilience means that we're going to have to cherry-pick who we buy from in the future in a big way. The Israel issue, I think Ella is completely right. There's a lot of anti-Semitism at the heart of the boycott movement that I find distasteful. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be thinking about who we buy stuff from and whether they are reliable partners.
Just to say that inside the chamber, House of Commons, the Speaker, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, is paying tribute to the NHS, which isn't surprising since it's the 75th anniversary. That, of course, is why the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition are elsewhere, because they're at the service marking that anniversary at Westminster Abbey. But this is all happening before we get to Prime Minister's questions with Oliver Dowden and Angela Rayner. So we'll let him finish his words. Just finally, Melanie, the exemptions that you talked about, I mean, there are some, of course, Alicia Cairns, actually, senior Tory MP, saying actually Israel should be on the list of exemptions, allowing councils to make those decisions to boycott it.
Well, as I say, the purpose of the boycott movement is not simply to express criticism or concern or anything like that. It is to destroy Israel through both economic pressure and through the demonisation programme.
Let's go into the chamber.
Deputy Prime Minister! Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, I have been asked to reply on behalf of my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, who is actually attending a service right now in Westminster Abbey to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the NHS. And, Mr. Speaker, may I associate myself with your comments. The NHS continues to be a treasured national institution, and I'm sure colleagues across the House in this session will join you in celebrating its values, its achievements, and in thanking staff for their huge commitment to patients. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I too associate myself with the remarks you made, celebrating the 75th anniversary of the NHS, and on behalf of my constituents and all our constituents, thank them for the work they do day in and day out. Last Friday, Mr. Speaker, I met with a group of residents who have raised a petition to keep the last bank in Corringham Town open. The viability of our town centres is often dependent on the presence of a small number of anchor businesses, such as a post office or a bank. Can my right honourable friend therefore tell the House what action the government can take to ensure that at least one of these maintains a high street presence to support businesses and residents alike, particularly when these organisations have received significant government support?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right to raise this issue. Banks are a cornerstone of our high streets. Of course, it's ultimately a commercial decision for banks, but I do think it's right that they take into account the views of local communities, and I'm sure the bank in question will have heard the remarks to the House from my honourable friend, and I trust that they will take appropriate action.
I now come to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, Angela Rayner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I associate myself and thank you for your opening comments regarding our NHS, and thank all of those staff that have worked and continue to work in our NHS today. And I'm sure members across the whole House will join me in paying tribute to Lord Bob Kerslake, a decent and kind man who accomplished so much in both local and national government during a lifetime of public service. Our heartfelt condolences go to his family. Mr. Speaker, I'm glad to see the right honourable gentleman here today. I think I'm right in saying that I have the pleasure again next week, 2 weeks on the trot. They really have given up. Every day, 4,000 families' mortgages deals expire, 100,000 more since we last met, and millions more next year. Families are sick with worry about the cost of the Tory mortgage bombshell. Do they still claim to be the party of home ownership? Good luck with that.
Well, may I begin by associating myself with the Right Honourable Lady's remarks about Lord Bob Kerslake. I knew him from my time in Downing Street. He was a stalwart public servant, and he will be missed by many on both sides of this House. It may come as a surprise to the Right Honourable Lady, but actually some leaders trust their deputies to stand in for them. And when it comes to mortgage rates, I support the independence of the Bank of England taking the necessary measures to control inflation. Just ask the IMF about what we have done in support of them. They've said we have taken decisive and responsible action to bring down inflation, and we will continue to do so. But what's Labour's plan? To borrow £28 billion a year, pushing up inflation. To cut our domestic energy supply, pushing up inflation. And to penalise workers saving into their pensions, pushing up inflation. There we have it from Labour. Endless borrowing and higher prices.
Angela Rayner.
Mr. Speaker, we've had 13 years of Conservative failures, and that homeowners watching that pathetic answer will be cringing that they aren't celebrating the government's success. They're counting the cost of their failures, and the only thing that's not soaring in prices at the moment is his gags that are getting cheaper by the minute. And Mr. Speaker, it's not just homeowners that are suffering. Security of renters have been ripped away too, with higher mortgage costs handed directly to them. Given most renters live in homes with buy-to-let mortgage, can he tell us Are buy-to-let properties included in their mortgage support package, yes or no?
Definitely.
Well, it's actually the case that under this government, and thanks to my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Levelling Up, that we have introduced legislation for the first time to support renters, to give them greater security of tenure, and of course, the Chancellor will take all necessary measures to stand behind both mortgage holders and, of course, take necessary measures for renters. But look, we have a choice in this country, and the choice that we have made is to invest in our economy, giving us the fastest growing economy in the G7 for the past 2 years, creating jobs with record low unemployment and increasing people's wages by providing the national living wage, £1,600 into everyone's pockets. That's how this government is supporting people.
Angela Rayner.
Mr Speaker, I know the Deputy Prime Minister isn't very good on facts, but their party did crash the economy. And he will know that according to his own government's data, over 2 million buy-to-let properties are missing out on support. No-fault evictions are up by 116% this year. So will he tell us if the Prime Minister has a spine now to stand up to the vested interests in his own party and finally deliver their promise to ban no-fault evictions?
Well, I don't think the Prime Minister is going to take any lectures on weakness from the party opposite. I remember there's a lot of talk about reshuffle in the air from the Labour Party. The last time the leader of the Labour Party tried to sack the Right Honourable Lady, she walked out with a promotion. But we will continue to stand behind renters and to support them, and my right honourable friend will take all necessary steps.
Angela Rayner.
Mr Speaker, that answer is pathetic for all those people that are facing homelessness on his watch. We will ban no-fault evictions, Mr Speaker, unlike the party opposite. And Jessica and her 4 children from Plymouth were evicted from their home in April. They're temporarily living with Jessica's mother in a cramped house where her 2 eldest children are sleeping on blow-up beds in the front room surrounded by their belongings. Hardly the decent, secure life that his government promised. Don't families like Jessica deserve better?
Yes. Deputy Prime Minister.
I'll tell you what we're doing for families like Jessica's. We are increasing the national living wage. It was this party that introduced the national living wage, not the party opposite. It is this party that has doubled the personal allowance, cutting taxes for those people, and it is this party that has lifted 1 million people out of unemployment. I'm immensely proud of the record of this government, and that's why people will not trust the party opposite to crash the economy again.
Angela Rayner.
Mr Speaker, I asked a question about no-fault evictions. I was very clear on what the Labour Party would do, but I can't see us getting through a single one of these encounters without the Deputy Prime Minister blaming the opposition for his government's own record. When asked yesterday about the record low number of council houses being built, the Housing Minister said she didn't recognise that statistic. When asked about support for people in temporary accommodation, she said it wasn't her brief, the brief of the Housing Minister. So if council housing isn't her responsibility, whose is it?
Well, the party opposite may have failed to notice it's actually under this government that more council houses were built than when they were in office. It's actually under this party that we have record levels of housing being built. We stand very proudly on the record of this government, but look at what we have done more broadly. Inflation and waiting lists coming down, growth forecasts up, Albanian crossings down. Well, we're delivering on our priorities. What have we seen from the party opposite? They've U-turned 5 times in the last month already. The record is clear. The only thing you can rely on the party opposite to deliver is broken promises.
Mr. Speaker, talking about broken promises, house building is set to collapse to its lowest level since the war. Rents and mortgages are soaring, home ownership is plummeting, and over 1 million people are trapped waiting for a council house. There is one simple solution to this problem, and everyone knows it. So when will he finally stand up for the national interest instead of their own interests and build more houses?
Prime Minister.
I say to the Right Honourable Lady, she may not have listened to the answer I gave and just moved straight on to the next pre-scripted question. We have built more houses under this government than the party opposite. And I'm afraid it's the same old thing from her. She stacks up the endless job titles, she takes the union cash, and she constantly talks Britain down. That's why we will do everything we can to keep Labour out of people's pockets, out of their lives, and out of government.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I might respectfully say to the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, if she wants to know what we're doing on rental reform, she can look at the rental reform bill that this government is introducing. But on a sec...
Is that your question? Well, I think you ought to ask your question.
My question, Mr. Speaker, is about the Slapton line in my constituency. Can it be right that Natural England is holding back major infrastructure development in South Devon and not allowing us to keep key infrastructure being developed?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right to speak up for the Slapton line. It's one of the most beautiful roads in the country. I understand that the Slapton line partnership, which includes Natural England and the Environment Agency, are working closely with the local community on their plans.
We now come to the Deputy Leader of the SNP, Murray Black.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would also like to begin by thanking all of the staff in our health services across these aisles. And as we celebrate the 75th anniversary of the health services in the UK, I want to reflect on 2 quotes from 2 people. The first one is, it's about using the private sector more, something we should be very comfortable with. The second quote is, people go as NHS patients to the private sector and we could do more of it. Can I ask the Deputy Prime Minister which quote is from the PM and which is from the Leader of the Opposition?
Well, Mr. Speaker, may I actually just begin by saying genuinely how sorry I was to hear that the Honourable Lady will be standing down at the next election. She and I joined this House at the same time, and I know she has contributed much to her party and to this place. And may I also say, I'm sure she will wish to join me in celebrating His Majesty King Charles, receiving the Scottish regalia, I think pretty much as we speak. There's always time for a Damascus conversion, Mr. Speaker. But when it comes to the NHS, I will take absolutely no lectures from either party on it. It has been there for me. I was born in an NHS hospital. My children were born in an NHS hospital. It's been there for me and my family, and this government has put record funding into it.
Murray Black.
The Deputy Prime Minister, I thank him for his kind words, and we did join this place at the same time, and I'm pretty sure we'll be leaving at the same time. One problem that faces the health service across these aisles is workforce. And research shows that Brexit has worsened the UK's shortage of doctors. European nurses registering to work in the UK fell by 90% after the Brexit referendum. Wow. What more will it take for both him and the Labour Party to admit the damage that Brexit is causing our health services?
Well, it all started off so nicely, Mr. Speaker. But I don't know whether the Honourable Lady has actually been listening to what the government has announced this week. We announced an additional £2.4 billion for our groundbreaking NHS workforce plan. That is the first time in the NHS's history that has happened. And if you look at the record since this party came to power, almost 40,000 more doctors and more than 50,000 more nurses. Once again, the Conservative Party delivering for the NHS.
Sir Edmund Lee.
Tonight, at West Lindsey's planning meeting, the RAF will apply for listed building consent to move the grave of Wing Commander Guy Gibson's dog. Apparently, the Home Office are quite content for 2,000 migrants to be cooped up next to 1,000 of my constituents living near the base, or actually on the base. But the RAF think it's intolerable that they should leave the grave of a dog who's lain in peace for 80 years. More importantly, will the Home Office start listening to us? If they insist on this proposal, will they put the illegal migrants at a discrete part of the base and let us get on with £300 million worth of levelling up, 100 buildings, many of them listed, a 2-mile-long runway, a spaceport, and let the dog lie in peace?
Well, I think my honourable friend knows that we do have to take action to address the unacceptable cost of housing migrants in hotels. And I actually thank him for his constructive approach that he's taken to RAF Scampton playing a role in respect of that. Of course, Home Office ministers will have heard his broader representations, and I'm sure they will respond to him.
Sir Geoffrey Donaldson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I, on behalf of my colleagues, extend our deep appreciation to all those past and present who continue to be dedicated to our NHS, including our staff in the health and social care system in Northern Ireland. Mr. Speaker, in Northern Ireland, GPs, nurses, doctors and carers are adversely constrained by a lack of sufficient funding for our health service. The Northern Ireland Fiscal Council have highlighted that our allocation falls beneath need, which compounds the difficulty year on year. Can the Deputy Prime Minister assure me of the willingness of the Government to engage on this issue and to ensure that public services get what they need to continue delivering for the people of Northern Ireland?
Yes, I'm very happy to give the Right Honourable Gentleman that assurance. As he knows, it is actually the case that the Department of Health in Northern Ireland has been allocated £7.3 billion, an increase of 20 million above 22-23. But of course it is the case that the absence of a Northern Ireland executive is exacerbating the severe challenges that the healthcare service in Northern Ireland is already facing, and a fully functioning devolved government is the right way to deliver the necessary reforms needed for the Northern Ireland Health Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Of the 16,700 cases of melanoma diagnosed in the UK every year, sadly over 2,000 will prove fatal. Regularly applying sunscreen is our most effective weapon against this deadly disease, yet the Treasury remains stubbornly opposed to exempting VAT on these life-saving products. As a melanoma survivor, and with a further heat wave expected later this month, will my right honourable friend do everything in his power to remove VAT on high-factor sunscreen to save lives and to support the NHS as they celebrate their 75th anniversary?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right to raise the dangers of melanoma. As a fair-headed person with a fair-headed family, where I'm acutely conscious of the need to wear sun cream. I won't trespass onto Treasury decisions in this setting, but I know my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, will have heard her representations.
Crawley.
Mr. Speaker, after 13 years of Tory government, this government's record is pretty dismal. Let's consider spiralling out of control inflation, interest rates set to hit 6.5% by the end of the year, energy prices double the rest of Europe, food shortages and strikes across the public sector and NHS, and graduates leaving university today with mountains of debt and little to no prospect of home ownership. Let me ask the Deputy Prime Minister, Will he admit his Tory government's failure and urge the Prime Minister to call a general election now?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, rather than focusing on playing politics, we're actually delivering for the British people. I listened to the Honourable Lady's litany. I was interested to note that her leader has been in power for 100 days. And what's their record been? 3 failing First Ministers, 2 unfinished ferries, and a failed deposit return scheme. I think we can all agree the people of Scotland deserve better.
Mr. Speaker, Conservative governments have a proud record of supporting the UK's steel industry. And I've stood up many times in this House. I don't know where they're laughing, Mr. Speaker, because steel production halved under Labour. I've stood up many times in this House to talk about the importance of steel, not just to my hometown of Scunthorpe, but to our whole nation. So will my right honourable friend agree with me? We are always going to need steel in this country, and if we can't make it ourselves, we're going to have to ship it all from the other side of the world with all the emissions, environmental and ethical concerns that will inevitably bring. Will he reaffirm today the government's commitment to making sure that we take further measures to ensure that we have a sustainable, long-term steel-making production in this country?
Well, I'm very happy to reaffirm this government's commitment to steel manufacturing, and I pay tribute to my honourable friend. I know what a champion she is for steel production in Scunthorpe, and long may she continue to do so. We have made meaningful offers of support to Tata and British Steel, and the Secretary of State recently visited Tata and British Steel to see firsthand the work underway.
Jamie Stone.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure that the Deputy Prime Minister will be as pleased as I am that work is well underway to construct the southern spaceport. In fact, it is ahead of schedule. Recently, the North Coast Space Cluster has been developed involving enterprise agencies and companies. Does the Deputy Prime Minister agree with me that this can build massively on the skills that have been built up for over many years at Dounreay? And secondly, that the establishment of links, international links, with possible companies in the United States can only be good news for the far north of Scotland?
Yes, I completely agree with the honourable gentleman's remarks. The development of this new spaceport is a key part of our ambition to grow the UK's space launch capabilities. And it is the fact that the first 3 years are expected to reach £20 million of investment, creating 40 jobs. And we are working with the United States, particularly through the Technology Safeguards Agreement, to allow UK companies to exchange technology with the United States.
Aaron Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could I associate myself with your comments about the NHS and pay tribute to all NHS workers, both in Newcastle-under-Lyme and across the country? And on that note, could I welcome the new long-term workforce plan, and in particular the extra 40% places for dental schools? Access to dentistry has been an issue for a number of my constituents. And would my right honourable friend consider the merits of actually opening new dental schools, not just new dental places? Keele University is one of the best medical schools in the country and would make an excellent site for a new dental school, if that would be...
Well, as ever, my honourable friend makes a very strong case for his constituency. As a result of the NHS long-term workforce plan, we are currently assessing capacity at existing dental schools to see whether they can accommodate the expansion in training places. But of course, we retain an open mind as to whether we need further such education facilities.
Kim Ledbetter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It was a pleasure to join colleagues from across the House this morning for the NHS 75th anniversary park run on this special day. However, my joy was short-lived when I returned to my office to find the usual array of emails from desperate constituents who cannot get a doctor's appointment, a dentist's appointment, access to children's mental health services or proper care for their loved ones. Does he agree with me that, as today's report from 3 highly respected think tanks suggests, after a decade of underinvestment, our beloved health service faces either managed decline under the Tories or a Labour government with a radical new health and wellbeing strategy putting its back on its feet?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it may not surprise you to hear I don't agree with that characterisation. Actually, I'll tell you about this government's record on the NHS. record funding, record doctors, record nurses, record scans, record operations. The only record from the party opposite is in Wales, where they now have the worst A&E waiting times in the country.
The only other record is the length of the answers. Maybe we could speed up with Richard Drax.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I associate myself with your comments about the NHS? My constituents in Weymouth and on Portland and I are getting a little tired of being told that placing a migrant barge in our port is in the national interest. It is not in the national interest, nor in ours. This barge, designed for 222, will accommodate 506 illegal migrants, already testing our overstretched resources. It was imposed on us without any consultation. Many concerns, both on the barge and what the 506 young men will do going round a seaside resort at the height of the summer, unmonitored and with little money. Can my honourable friend stop this and ask my honourable friend, the Home Secretary, to do likewise?
Well, I'm sure my honourable friend appreciates that we need to reduce the bill of housing asylum seekers in hotels, and we need to look at different measures to accommodate them. Of course, I am very happy to engage with the honourable gentleman. I'm sure the Home Secretary will do as well, to ensure that we can find a satisfactory solution in his constituency that protects his constituents' interests.
Eardley Horace.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the coroner found that the cause of Luke Ashton's suicide in April 2021 was gambling disorder. Immediately before his death, Luke, bombarded with inducements, placed over 1,200 bets. At no point did the operator intervene. From his previous brief, the Deputy Prime Minister will have extensive knowledge of the harm these inducements cause. So does he agree that the commitments to curb advertising and promotions in the gambling white paper do not go far enough to reduce harm and prevent more tragedies like Luke Ashton's suicide?
Well, the Honourable Lady will know from our conversations when I was Digital Secretary that I share her concerns about gambling inducements, and indeed I pay tribute to her for her campaigning on this issue. I think we have got a very good set of proposals in the gambling white paper, and that sits alongside the 2019 NHS long-term plan, which committed to 15 specialist units across England to support those with gambling addiction by 2024. So I think we have good proposals in place.
Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I draw the House's attention to the fact that we have the Chief Minister of His Majesty's Government of Gibraltar in the gallery, Fabian Picardo. Can I seek an assurance from the Deputy Prime Minister that as the UK-EU negotiations with regard to the border between Gibraltar and Spain continue, that the sovereign, freely expressed opinions of the Gibraltarian people to remain British will be protected, as well as their security and economic interests?
Well, I'm very happy to give my honourable friend and indeed the First Minister of Gibraltar exactly that assurance. This government will always stand up for the people of Gibraltar and their right to determine their own future.
Gerald Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sarcomas are cancers that can affect any part of the body, inside or outside, including muscles, bones, tendons, blood vessels and fatty tissues. Sarcoma is rare. 15 people diagnosed every day in the UK, around 5,300 around the UK, including families in Merthyr Tydfil and Rumney. Awareness is low, and as this is Sarcoma Awareness Week, could I ask the Deputy Prime Minister if he'll meet with me and families affected so that we can discuss what more the government can do to raise awareness and vital funds for research going forward?
Well, I'm very happy to give that commitment. I think probably best on behalf of health ministers. And indeed, one of my colleagues in Downing Street, who was the Prime Minister's PPS, sadly died of that disease. So I have a great awareness of it, and it's important that we continue to raise its profile.
Although,
last week, as an alumni of Durham University, I had the pleasure of going to the installation of Dr. Fiona Hill as the new Chancellor. Dr. Hill started in Bishop Auckland, couldn't afford a school uniform to go to the high school when she got a scholarship, finished up working in the White House, and is an example of social mobility beyond it. That's what she's going to be championing as the new Chancellor. Could I ask me to encourage the Secretary of State for Levelling Up to work with me and the Left Behind Neighbourhoods APPG to do everything we can to support her?
Well, I join my honourable friend in relaying the government's congratulations to her, and I will ensure that the Secretary of State hears the representations that he made.
Tim Doherty.
Mr Speaker, universities in Cardiff and indeed across the UK are home to world-leading research and innovation, but thousands of jobs and huge amounts of expertise are now at risk because the government's dithering in negotiations over Horizon. The FT reported last week that Sir Paul Nurse, Nobel laureate and head of the Francis Crick Institute, describing the delays as absurd and damaging science and damaging the country. So is the government still committed to negotiating a deal? And if they are, why don't they get on with it?
Well, since we agreed the Windsor Framework, we've had very constructive discussions on Horizon, but the difference between my party and his is that we won't accept a deal at any price. We will wait until we get the best deal for the British people and British universities.
Karen Bradley.
Very much, Mr Speaker. I am running a campaign at the moment, A Year of Reasons to Visit the Moorlands, where each week for a year I will focus on one of the many reasons to visit the Moorlands, including we've had so far Hetty's Tea Room in Froggle, we've had Heaton House Farm Wedding Venue, we've had brilliant artists and Alton Towers, and this week is Leek Club Day. Can I invite my right honourable friend and you, Mr Speaker, to visit the Staffordshire Moorlands constituency to see one of the reasons for yourself?
Yay! Well, I would be delighted to do so. I think maybe Hetty's Tea Room is more my cup of tea than Alton Towers, but I'm sure I can arrange a visit there.
I think we'll both go on the big rides together. There we are. Chris Law.
We're going to leave Prime Minister's questions there. You can continue watching it on BBC Parliament. But for this part of Politics Live, let me introduce our guests. For the government, Hugh Merriman, Transport Minister. For the Labour Party, Jonathan Ashworth, Shadow Work and Pensions, and Munira Wilson, Liberal Democrat, Education spokesperson, and the BBC's chief political correspondent, Nick Eardley. Welcome to all of you. As you will have noticed, Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer were not there. Why not, Nick?
They're at Westminster Abbey for a service marking 75 years of the NHS. But it has become a bit of a thing, Rishi Sunak not being at Prime Minister's questions. I was just totting up the numbers at the end.
And?
He's missed 5.
Is that a record?
It's 5 out of 30 since he became PM. So that feels like quite a lot, 1 in 6. I don't think it's the record, but I'm sure it'd be up there.
Right. Well, someone else who is questioning the wisdom of that decision not to turn up, as he would see it, Chris Bryant, Labour MP, on the liaison committee, where Rishi Sunak was, of course, in appearance because he was being questioned by this senior committee of MPs. This is what Chris Bryant had to say.
But you're not coming to Prime Minister's questions tomorrow, are you, or next week?
Yes, because I am attending the 75th anniversary celebration for the NHS.
And you decided when that should be, so you could have had it tomorrow evening or tomorrow morning?
No, again, that's not right. I did not decide when that was, and quite frankly, even if it was on a different day, also because His Majesty is in Scotland on Wednesday, it might have been reasonable for me to be there as well. And with regard to the week afterwards, I'm also at the NATO summit.
Well, that was Chris Bryant. Obviously not happy. Are you unhappy? Should he be there, Rishi Sunak? That's a lot of Prime Minister's questions to miss.
Well, I mean, if he had not attended the NHS church service, then people would have said, why has he not done that? It's not respectful to the NHS. So this is one of these classic ones where you can never win either way. You can't be in two places at the same time. He's attended the NHS event, which I think is the right thing to do, and he'll obviously be attending the NATO event, which is absolutely the right thing to do, given the state of the world right now. Well, maybe on the NATO,
but surely this is the highlight, if you like, of the parliamentary week, is that the Prime Minister comes to the Commons to be scrutinised by the Leader of the Opposition. And he has been missing in action 5 times. It'll be 7 times by the time he misses next week. That's not really sustainable or credible, is it?
Well, it's important that he's at the events that the Prime Minister is there to represent.
Or is he frit, as they say?
Absolutely not. No, he performs really well in Prime Minister's questions.
Well,
but the Leader of the Opposition and him have both been invited by the organisers to attend the event at Westminster Abbey to celebrate the anniversary of the NHS, which we should be proud of. I'm glad he's there.
Right. Well, I mean, what would Keir Starmer do as Prime Minister? Not attend the 75th anniversary of the NHS, the service at Westminster Abbey, or the NATO meeting next week?
Well, look, I mean, I worked in Downing Street many, many years ago for a Labour government.
I've got a suspicion that when this invitation came in, or when the NHS got in touch with Downing Street to say we're organising this event, that somebody in Downing Street could have said, great, but just hang on, make sure you do it in the morning or in the afternoon, because the Prime Minister will have Prime Minister's questions.
Because he's quite important,
Things
the Prime
like that
Minister.
do go on. Those conversations do go on. The truth is, he doesn't want to defend his record because NHS waiting lists are still going up, prices are still going up, and the boats are still coming. So he hasn't got a record to defend. So I'm not surprised he's dodging scrutiny in the House of Commons.
Of course, the irony is that if Jeremy Corbyn had become Prime Minister, then he would have been in the House of Commons next week for PMQs, because we wouldn't be in NATO. So there we are.
Oh, you had a bit of time to think about that one, Hugh. But you say you worked... I'll come to you in just a second. You say you worked at number 10 under a previous Labour administration. Are you saying that they really look forward to doing Prime Minister's questions and wouldn't use or find reasons perhaps not to be there?
Well, when there are international summits like NATO, which is entirely reasonable not to be in Parliament for something like that, it's expected and accepted that Prime Ministers are away. But things like this, you can usually make sure that timetables work out. The other thing, by the way, it's not just that he doesn't do PMQs, he does less statements than other Prime Ministers as well. I'm not sure if anyone's totted it up, but there's a sense in which he doesn't come to Parliament as often, I think, than previous Prime Ministers used to come to Parliament. And, of course, he didn't even tell us whether he was going to vote or what his opinion was of the Boris Johnson report, but he gave us his opinion on the cricket the other day, so he dodges scrutiny.
I mean, critics would say he doesn't answer questions anyway, or not him, but whoever is the Prime Minister at the time. So is it that important if he misses the odd one or two?
It absolutely is. You know, we've got... This government is answerable to Parliament, so he should be turning up not just to be scrutinised by the Leader of the Opposition, but by parliamentarians, MPs from all sides of the House. And yet we've seen that he's missing crucial votes on things like the Privileges Committee, coming up with all sorts of excuses not to be there. Yesterday, I think he told the Liaison Committee he had to dash off for another appointment. It was a visit across the road to the Evelina.
He's getting things done. He's delivering.
It was a visit to the Evelina Hospital, which is an important thing to do. But again, that is something, I'm sure, the timing of which was in his control, in the same way that I'm sure the government could have had a say in the timing of the service today. I think he just doesn't want to be held to account. The government's given up, frankly. I don't think they're out of ideas. We see the business is really light in Parliament. They're out of steam, out of ideas, and frankly, the sooner we have a general election, the better.
Nick?
I think it is becoming more of a problem for Rishi Sunak, because remember, he didn't turn up for the vote on Boris Johnson. The Privileges Committee didn't tell us how he wanted to vote.
Awkward vote.
Either. There was criticism from the Speaker yesterday that the NHS workforce plan wasn't announced in Parliament, but was announced at a press conference instead. Nothing wrong with press conferences, but there was some
Spend your life going to them, don't you?
And we should just point out that the Westminster Abbey service is probably a 4-minute walk from the chamber. So it doesn't take a long time to get from one to the other.
Has the government given up? That's what Angela Rayner said.
Absolutely, we have not given up. I mean, we work incredibly hard, and Rishi himself is incredibly professional, runs government like you'd expect a top manager to run their company, and that's something that I think has been really refreshing over the last 8 months.
All right.
What you say about Rishi Sunak, he is a hard worker, he's focused and he's professional. I think everyone would recognise that.
All right, well, let's talk about the NHS, since it is at the forefront of everybody's mind, certainly today, if not every day at the moment. Some differing views on what should be done to or for the NHS. In the Eye, the former Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, calls for NHS Royal Commission, saying health service is unsustainable. The former Health Secretary says the NHS is frozen in time, and for decades governments have fallen short on improving it. In response to Sajid Javid speaking his mind, now he's no longer in the Cabinet, The Times, Steve Barclay, the current Health Secretary, calls for evolution, not revolution, which is what Sajid Javid was talking about as the NHS turns 75. But we also have this from the former Labour Prime Minister, Tony Blair. Let NHS patients, he says in The Telegraph, pay to skip the queue, talking about the fact that, yes, if you have the money or could find the money, you could pay and therefore get your treatment done more quickly. Which view do you agree with, Hugh?
Well, I certainly don't agree with the view from Tony Blair there. I mean, there is a private system which people are entitled to use, but within the NHS system, everyone is treated on the basis of where their need is most acute.
And Sajid Javid, revolution?
Well, I mean, as far as the workforce reform, the plan that we've just put in place for 15 years to really grow our numbers, then that's the type of thing we should be doing. I mean, the idea of having a Royal Commission takes an awful long time to actually get delivered, and people need delivery now, and that's what we're focused on.
Are politicians honest about the state of the NHS and the future of the NHS?
Well, absolutely we are honest on it, but we also have great pride in the NHS. It's a unique institution for us. It's something that makes this country, I would say, the most proud in terms of all the things we have. And we should cherish it and build on it, and that's exactly what we intend to do. We've invested every single year as a government in putting more money into the NHS. Of course, people live longer, so that means there's more people to treat, more challenges, but we're focused on it. It's people's sort of number one priority to ensure the NHS is properly run, and we're on that.
Do you agree with the former Labour Prime Minister, Tony Blair, in terms of let NHS patients pay to get ahead on that waiting list of 7.2 million?
No, I think that the NHS, free at the point of use, is one of the most important features of our National Health Service, and it's been there since the start of the NHS, 75 years ago, when a Labour government created it. Conservatives voted against it, of course.
48 years, that was 75.
They voted against it 22 times in 5 minutes.
All right, and the idea of a Liberal, William Beveridge, of course.
Implemented by Labour government. Now Bevan, of course. But no, I don't agree with charging us.
But you do agree with more private sector involvement?
Look, you can use the private sector to get waiting lists down, which is what Wes Streeting and Keir Starmer have been highlighting. I mean, what the NHS needs is a serious reform plan, not a kind of top-down Lansley-like reform plan, which was disastrous for the NHS, and the NHS is still dealing with some of the consequences of that.
So what is that serious? What serious? That was a serious reform, if you like. It was huge.
It was a complete mess.
But it's been reversed.
So many legacy problems in the NHS.
But we've had endless reform. We have had private sector involvement. In fact, it was started or increased under Tony Blair or in his time. We've had the Lansley reforms. We've had clinical commissioning changes. What sort of reform is left?
Look at the changing nature of the burden of ill health in society. We are all living longer with a whole series of chronic conditions, which need to be managed, whether that is diabetes or whether that's hypertension. We shouldn't be left to wait to see a health professional until our condition gets worse and then be forced into a hospital. We need to be moving
lots more government
into
community
health services, and we need to use modern technology to help us all manage our different chronic conditions better as well.
Can I tell you what's missing from this conversation?
Yeah.
Social care. The NHS is going to struggle to survive unless we actually reform social care, and successive governments have failed to do so. I was very proud the Liberal Democrats in government actually legislated to reform social care. When the Tories got in on their own in 2015, they shelved it. Until you start to fix the problems in social care, you will not be able to release the resources the NHS needs. That's why Liberal Democrats have proposed, for instance, increasing the minimum wage for social care staff by £2 per hour, so that we can start to fill those gaps in social care.
But what about the funding? What about the funding model for social care? Because the reason it hasn't been brought in by successive governments is it's been too difficult to do, and voters have rejected those ideas.
Well, on the plan that I've just suggested to you about increasing pay, that
one part of it
suggested would be paid for by a gambling tax, and we know that gambling, as we heard in PMQs, has a massive impact on the NHS. But more broadly, Liberal Democrats have long said that you do need a cross-party commission consensus. At the last election and the previous election,
how long would that take?
We proposed a penny on income tax to pay for health and social care at the time, but that was the last manifesto.
Oh, you don't think it'll make the next manifesto?
We haven't written it yet. So you'll come back to me when we have a general election. However, we need to reform social care, and we need to prevent ill health as well. And that means tackling many of the things, like whether that's junk food advertising to children, whether that's tackling gambling and other online harms that have a devastating impact on people's mental ill health.
Wes Streeting, the Shadow Health Secretary, rejected the idea of a cross-party commission to look at this. Is he right?
Well, I think we have said we are prepared to talk to other parties about the future of social care. I mean, we're right. I mean, one of the issues with social care is that some of the austerity cuts in the first 10 years or so of the government fell desperately deep on social care budgets, which meant that people were literally trapped in hospitals because there wasn't a care package for them in the wider community. So you do need to fix social care. You're not going to get the waiting list, which are now, what, 7.5 million people on a waiting list. People waiting months and months and months for treatment, sometimes waiting months and months for mental health treatment if you're a teenager because of the capacity issues in the NHS after 13 years of the Conservatives. You're not going to deal with all of that unless you also deal with the sister service of the NHS, if you like, the social care service. So, look, we've got to look at the ways in which we do that. We've got to look at the ways in which we deal with the vacancies in social care as well, running at over 100,000 at the moment. I think 110,000 last time I looked. So, yeah, I mean, yeah, you need a plan for social care.
I mean, you came up with your workforce plan. We waited a long time for it. What about social care?
Well, I was struck when Munira mentioned sort of working cross-party, because I remember in 2017 in Eastbourne delivering leaflets, and when Theresa May had come up with a proposal, which was, you know, quite radical.
But she came up with the proposal...
It was then labelled as a death tax, and that was on the leaflet.
No, actually, that was Gordon Brown. That was Gordon Brown. I mean, the problem is it was at the start...
That was the previous one with...
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying, is that they get rejected. Gordon Brown was accused of a death tax, and...
Because when it comes to election time, all of the sort of words about let's work together go out of the window on the election leaflets, and it gets dressed up as something else. So it's incredibly difficult to work cross-party. And I represent a constituency on the South Coast where people do tend to retire to, and so we don't have the council tax receipts to ultimately pay for the care. In that regard, it's a real challenge for us. So that's why I'm really pleased that we have put more money into social care. And also, most importantly, working out the way to reduce hospital waiting lists is to actually try and ease people out of hospitals who don't need to be there. And that, again, is part of our plan within inside hospitals.
Right. Well, some of your colleagues now want to stop people coming from abroad to work in our care service, which will just make the shortages even worse.
Well, that's the group of Conservative MPs, yes, who would like to take care jobs off the shortage occupation list, I presume. Yeah, what do you say to that?
Well, they're Conservative backbench MPs. They're entitled to their opinion. They're not ministers. The government's approach has been set out.
Deputy Chair was going to go on to it. He was going ahead for them.
We rely, and again, as a constituency MP, I can tell you this, we rely on those people that work from abroad in social care. And it wouldn't function properly without those people doing that job for us. We do, of course, need to grow our own workforce, and we have plans to do that. Right. But at the same time, right now, we do need people to help us.
Will you talk to the Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Party, since he spearheaded it?
Well, I don't believe he was there at that particular event.
He pulled a sickie. He pulled a sickie. After he was been eating cat food on the telly at the weekend.
That's a very technical term.
I value all colleagues' contributions in terms of coming up with ideas and points, but I'm telling you the government policy is as I've just said.
Our NHS and care service would collapse without people coming from abroad.
All right. Well, look, before we move on, a reminder, you can catch up with Politics Live on the iPlayer, and you can now also find us on BBC Sounds every day. We're publishing each programme as a podcast. Very handy if you're on the move. But for all the millions of people watching the programme, let's go on to this story. Nick, you can explain it to us. BBC News headline, Partygate. Police reopen investigation into Tory jingle and mingle event. What's this about?
December 2020, Conservative Party HQ, Sean Bailey's campaign had what videos seem to suggest was a party. We got hold of the invitation, one of my colleagues did, that said it was a jingle and mingle event. At the time, the police hadn't issued any fines. They had investigated it, but decided not to take action. They've reopened that case after seeing the new evidence. And then there's the second case, which is the one from Parliament in December 2020, which is the drinks event that it's alleged that Sir Bernard Jenin was at.
Right, and he's a prominent Conservative MP. Have we heard any more, either or anything from him in response to it?
Not anything that would go by an explanation or detailed discussion. He told my colleague Chris Mason last night that it wouldn't be appropriate to discuss the details now that there's an investigation going on, although before there was an investigation, he wasn't too keen to discuss the details either.
Let's look at something different. This is the former Shadow Chancellor of the Labour Party, John McDonnell, in an interview on Newsnight. Let's have a listen.
What I'm saying is, I think what he's allowed to happen is a right-wing faction become drunk with power and use devices within the party almost on a search and destroy of the left. They seem to be more interested in destroying the presence of the left in the party than getting a Labour government. We all want a Labour government. We want a broad church party. We want to build the enthusiasm before the election, but we need the commitment when we're in government, when times get rough. And that's when you draw upon all all elements of the party. You can't let one faction dominate that way and alienate others.
Is Keir Starmer waging a purge against the left of your party?
No, no. But what he has done, quite rightly, is that when there have been members who have expressed views which are anti-Semitic, they have been quite rightly kicked out of the Labour Party because Keir Starmer wants to pull, or said he wanted to pull, anti-Semitism out of the Labour Party by its roots, and we have made extraordinary, welcome and tremendous progress on tackling anti-Semitism in the Labour Party under Keir Starmer's leadership, and we will make absolutely no apology for that. There is no place in the Labour Party for people who express anti-Semitic views. And on the next point about selections and so on, we want a good first-class calibre of candidates coming through to be members of Parliament in the next Parliament and serve a Labour government. So we're going to make no apologies for putting in place procedures to make sure we have some of the very best
John McDonnell obviously
for
feels that includes excluding people on the left of the party. I mean, the decision to exclude Jamie Driscoll as a candidate in the North East mayoral election, which has been linked to his on-stage appearance with the film director and now expelled Labour member Ken Loach in March. And Neil Lawson, director of the left-leaning think tank Compass, has said he's been kicked out of the Labour Party. Well, he's been warned he will be kicked out of the Labour Party for retweeting a post back in 2021 encouraging voters in Oxford to vote tactically for the Green Party. Again, are you sure you're not...
And what was the consequence of his tactical appeal to the voters of Oxford would have been to dislodge a Labour councillor. So he wasn't saying vote tactically to stop a Tory like he's trying to hint at and present. He was suggesting vote tactically to get rid of a Labour councillor. And Labour Party membership is about supporting Labour candidates in all circumstances, everywhere. So, you know, I've got no sympathy with his position, I'm afraid.
So there doesn't look as if there's going to be much cooperation or any cooperation between parties, yours and the Labour Party, to dislodge the Conservatives at an upcoming general election?
I don't think the voters need that kind of pact or cooperation. The voters have shown time and again, as we've seen in recent parliamentary by-elections, and we're seeing again at the moment down in Somerton and Frome, that where actually they're trying to get rid of the Conservative government or a Conservative MP, they're very savvy and they know who the main challengers are. So whether it's Somerton and Frome at the moment, or Tiverton and Honiton last year, or North Shropshire before that, we found Labour and Green-leaning voters lending their support to the Liberal Democrats. That happens in my own constituency of Twickenham. I have Labour Party members and Green Party members who come up to me and say, when you're out, I support you to keep the Tories out. Unfortunately, we have an electoral system that means people are often forced to vote with their heads rather than their hearts. It's one of the reasons why I and the Liberal Democrats strongly support electoral reform.
Right, should those people be kicked out of the party? They're talking to the Liberal Democrats all the time, perhaps about shifting their support to other parties?
Well, I mean, if we're talking about MPs and councillors, they will be, if they're shifting support to Liberal Democrats, they won't be Labour councillors. But I think you're talking about voters, aren't you?
I was just talking about, voters who are party members who will, lend me their support at election time because they don't want the Tories to get in and Twickenham.
Labour Party members will, I'm sure, want to vote for Labour Party candidates. And if they're campaigning for other parties, then that is incompatible with Labour Party membership.
Right. But they've been talking to you, have they, Labour Party members, about that?
I'm just saying that when you're out and about talking to voters, there are Labour-leaning people, sometimes who may be card-carrying members of the party, not necessarily activists, who will say, I'm lending you my support to make sure the Tories don't get in. But that happens whether they're party members or not. Up and down the country, I think people are sick and tired of this Tory government, and they know how to vote to get them out.
Nick?
It's interesting because we often hear that there's not any voting pact, but politicians are happy to come on and kind of give a nod and a wink to say, you know who the main challenger is in that seat. Sometimes it will be Labour. I think we're going to see more of this in the next few weeks because we've got the by-elections on the 20th of July. And again, when you speak privately to people in the Labour Party and the Lib Dems, they both say, if it's Selby, yes, of course, Labour are the challengers. If it's Somerton and Frome, of course, the Lib Dems are the challengers. One that's going to be really interesting when it happens, though, is Mid-Bedfordshire, because both the Lib Dems and the Labour Party are adamant that they're the main challenger to the Conservatives, and both are saying they're going to go hell for leather.
Right, we're going to talk more about that, of course, in the run-up to those by-elections. Because we've got you here as the Transport Minister, this story in BBC News, train firms plan mass closures of ticket offices. Is this something you support? It's going to go down well with the unions, isn't it?
Well, the reality of the situation now is that 10% of all ticket transactions are conducted across the counter. So you have staff that are sat behind the counter where they haven't got enough to do. We want to actually bring those staff members from the counter onto the platform where they can help passengers, particularly those that have the most vulnerabilities, make them feel reassured, give them the information, help them purchase their ticket. And so we'll redeploy the staff. And so that, to me, is a great way of giving staff a better, more rewarding job, and also better for the customer that sees a member of staff on the platform rather than in a ticket office that they don't seem to enter into. Right, well, Hugh Merriman's obviously in favour. Jonathan, would a Labour government reopen the ticket offices?
Well, I mean, we have expressed concern about what this means for people who are not able to use the machines and so on. I think, and our Shadow Transport Secretary has written to you or written to your boss asking a series of questions about what will actually happen to these staff. So are you guaranteeing those staff are going to be redeployed, or is there going to be redundancies?
We're certainly guaranteeing
that
any station which is currently staffed won't become unstaffed as a result of these changes. And the question is, we've got, it used to be 1 in 3 tickets sold across the counter, now 1 in 10. At what point would you actually make this change?
Right, well, I'm afraid you're not going to have time to answer, lucky old you. That's all we have time for. Thank you to all of my guests today. And Elizabeth Glinker will be here in the chair at 10:15 tomorrow. Bye-bye.